Welcome to Conversations with LSNTAP, where we meet interesting people working to increase access to justice through technology. Here's your host, Shellie Reed.
But thank you so much for joining us today. I am Shellie Reed from the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. We are here today to speak with Jonathan Petts of Upsolve, and we're going to learn a whole lot about Upsolve, what they're doing, and a little bit more about Jonathan as well. So Jonathan, why don't we start by having you tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are and how you got where you are today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Shellie. I'm excited to be here with this community. So my story starts in 2016. I'm a native New Yorker and was working in a law firm in New York on corporate bankruptcy cases. So, restructuring companies like Kodak, and it turns out I was pretty terrible at that work. But in my spare time, I was doing these pro bono cases, helping low-income New Yorkers buried in medical debt apply for Chapter 7 bankruptcy so they could get a fresh start. And pretty much early, one of my first pro bono clients, a woman named Linda in South Brooklyn, called me a year after I had helped her. And she told me that, it was this big success story. She was now debt-free. Her credit score is 100 points higher. She had a better job. And she said something that really resonated with me, sort of an epiphany for me, which was, if I hadn't have found you, I still would have been trapped in debt because it cost $2,000 to hire a bankruptcy lawyer. And if I had $2,000, I wouldn't be filing for bankruptcy. And that moment, shortly after that, I met my co-founder of Rohan, who was a tech person. And he convinced me that this process, Chapter 7 filings, could be automated for low income, for like simpler low income Chapter 7 cases. And that if we could do that, then we could help people out of poverty and out of debt at a scale that hadn't been possible in Chapter 7 before. And so we started, I remember when we first started, Rohan gave me this spreadsheet, and he said, we're going to write down all of the questions that go into this 90-page bankruptcy form PDF. And then we're going to create a type form out of it. And then we're going to invite people in Brooklyn to come into our co-working space and fill out the questionnaire. And then we're going to take their answers and we're going to write it manually into these 90-page PDF, and we're going to give it to them to file in the bankruptcy court down the street. And so I, immediately thought, this sounds like a terrible idea that is destined for failure very soon. But my co-founder was just a very fearless person, the way 20-year-olds often are. And so basically I decided that, my corporate bankruptcy thing wasn't going very well. And so I just decided to make the leap and sort of see where this went. And if it, ended up failing as I was, thought it would, at least I would learn a bunch for whatever was next. And fast forward to today, it's now used in 47 states around the country, has helped over 12,000 families successfully get a fresh start. And now sort of we're thinking about sort of the next step that we can sort of expand the model to. But that's sort of what brought me here.
That's awesome. So in that, obviously you felt that you obviously had challenges along the way. What are some of the challenges as a founder of a company that you faced? And what lessons can you share that might help someone who wants to create, something, to help other types of problems?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is just starting and having I was so scared. I came from this world where I was, winning my dad's approval. My dad was like was an immigrant sort of success story, and he had no education after age 17. And he, like his vision for my life was to go to, a fancy law school and to work at a fancy law firm in New York. And like, that's what it meant to impress my dad. And, and so, in making this leap, it was scary because I knew I was leaving all of that behind. And I knew, or I thought that what I was doing was it was so risky. It was like definitely going to fail. We had no funding. And so I think that the biggest lesson is just having the courage to start and being okay with failing at the first thing, and hopefully failing quickly, is the biggest piece of advice. And for me, like, it's very rare that first time entrepreneurs end up succeeding, and like just by some, stroke of fate or faith, like it ended up working out for us the first time. But really, like looking back, I think I just would have started sooner and just have been willing to step into the fear a little bit earlier, because I knew where I wasn't going anywhere.
I think that's where courage, I mean, that takes great courage to first get past the expectations of your parents. I think we all have to deal with that at some point. But getting back to what you said, I heard some very Lean Six Sigma phrases in there. So are you a proponent of Lean Six Sigma and the lean way of doing things?
Yeah, definitely. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries was a book that I read very early in my startup journey. And, that book was, the main idea, I think, is you don't know what people want until you launch it and get their feedback. And so trying to build the perfect product before launching is like, very frequently a waste of time. And so that was really I think that was one thing that my co-founder, Rohan, really sort of drilled into my head at the start of Upsolve, because, being a lawyer, I'm very much like, let's make the brief perfect before we, release it to the partner. And Rohan was, very much like, no, we just need to build something ugly and workable and get it into users' hands fast, and like have them tell us much faster why it's terrible, and then we'll be able to change those things, and then we'll put it in front of their hands again, and then they'll tell us the next reason why it's terrible, and then ultimately the product won't be terrible, and we'll be able to help a bunch of people.
I think that giving up that control and being willing to make mistakes is key when you're developing a business. So let's kind of go back a little bit to what has your career path looked like, and how far has it strayed from where you thought it would go?
Well, so far, my vision of where I thought I was going to be is I was going to be like a partner at this, fancy New York law firm. And that didn't happen, thank God. And instead, I love my job. Sometimes, basically, all that I do is think about what are the next set of access to justice problems that we want to solve, that we think we can make a big impact, and creating stories around that to tell funders, and creating stories to recruit teammates. We have some really talented teammates. And then make sure that the team's working on the right thing, and coaching people to grow and become leaders themselves. And I get to have these ideas, and everybody else implements them. It's the most amazing thing. I never had that as a lawyer. I didn't know it was possible. So just really grateful for the team. Like, that's the big thing. When me and Rohan started, it was just the two of us, and I had to do we had to do everything, like incorporating ourselves, answering every, customer support email, user support email. And now we have people that are just focused on those things, and it's like bliss.
So let's go in and talk more about how Upsolve works and what are the benefits for users.
Sure. So the benefits for users is currently 90+% of bankruptcy applications in the country are filed by attorneys. And that's amazing if you can afford an attorney. And when people ask, should I use an attorney? We always say, yes, absolutely. If you can afford an attorney, you definitely should. But the reality is that hiring an attorney costs $1,500 to upwards of $3,000 for many Chapter 7s. And just so many low-income Americans can't afford that. And so for those folks, we've created a lot of content. So we have about 2.6 million individuals coming to our website every year. And a portion of those will start our screener to see if they can use our free Chapter 7 filing tool. And there are really complicated Chapter 7 cases. We screen those folks out and offer them a free consultation with a private bar attorney. But for people that have a simple case and pass our eligibility screener, they will go through a TurboTax style workflow. And that will, basically will be answered asking them all of the questions that we need to fill out their bankruptcy forms. And instead of asking questions like, do you have any unsecured non-priority debt, like the bankruptcy forms ask, we put it in plain language that people can understand. And so the user will go through that TurboTax style workflow. They'll download their forms. They will we'll give them a set of filing instructions, how to file it with the court. And then we're actually able to get people's case numbers by scraping Pacer. So we're able to track cases to discharge and see if folks need any additional support along the way. And at this point, we have a 98% discharge rate. The real value proposition for users is they're able to get the ability to help in filing for Chapter 7, which they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford.
That's awesome. 98% sounds really high. Do you have any comparison to someone doing it all themselves? Do you have any statistics on that?
Yeah, I mean, the national average for Chapter 7 is 96%. And so that includes attorneys, and the vast majority of these cases are filed by attorneys. There's about 10% pro se. And so it's comparable to the national average. I think because of the fact that we're screening out harder cases, we're really focused on creating a safe experience for the people we are able to serve.
That's awesome. So what are some of the myths and misconceptions about bankruptcy that you encounter?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know if you call it a myth, but there's just a huge amount of shame that our users feel in filing for Chapter 7. That's something that we really work. I've really tried to build our product with that emotional state of our users in mind. So we built Jim Greiner, who's a professor at Harvard Law School, has done a lot of research on making legal processes, legal forms more accessible using cartoons. And so we incorporated those cartoons into the product. We incorporate inspirational stories of people that have, like famous Americans like Walt Disney and Milton Hershey, who went through their own bankruptcy process and went on to become, these huge successes that we know. And so, yeah, the end goal is to make a process that's like, as frictionless to use as TurboTax, but that also has this emotional support, knowing that it's like, this is very different from filing your taxes.
That was, so what needs to change in our country in the way bankruptcy is handled? I know that you're very involved in the equality and the equal justice and making justice available to all. So what suggestions do you have that would help our system?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of data of how people of color and low-income Americans in general are disproportionately affected by debt collection lawsuits. And though that's like, one of the biggest drivers to Chapter 7. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be done in creating access to legal services for people so they don't snowball in their finances and wouldn't have to file for Chapter 7. So there's work we're doing on that front. And I mean, in terms of the Chapter 7 bankruptcy process itself, like making that more equitable, I think Upsolve shouldn't exist. There's no reason why the courts can't have a simple, easy way to file no asset Chapter 7 bankruptcy cases for people who don't have houses, who have under $10,000 in assets. But we have the Administrative Office of U.S. Courts, very much takes the view that we're going to give PDFs. We don't want to give any legal advice. We don't want, and I just think that fails low-income Americans who are just under so much stress. Asking them to navigate a 90-page PDF full of legalese is just, it's really inconsiderate would be the nicest way that I could say it.
So do you think these changes should be at the national level? Obviously, but I mean, how can we advocate? I guess, how can these changes reach where they need to go? How can we reach the people who are able to make these changes?
Yeah, I mean, so for bankruptcy, it's just the U.S. Office of Administrative Courts. They oversee the entire bankruptcy filings in all 50 states. And also, local bankruptcy courts to a lesser extent. For debt collection lawsuits, which again are very closely tied to bankruptcy, I think that's a case where a lot of work needs to be done on a state-by-state level. And that work is starting to be done. The Pew Foundation is doing amazing work. They just released a study on debt collection lawsuits in the state of Michigan. And the terrible consequences those suits are having for low-income Michiganders, and how the default rate, I believe, the default judgment rate is around 90%, I think. And so they've created a working group that's proposing all kinds of procedural reforms to make it harder to file debt collection suits and to make it easier to respond. I mean, I think that work is really valuable and needs to be done on a state-by-state level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I had a short stint of working in debt collection and eviction, and it was unbelievable the hurdles that people were facing from the banks. You know, the paperwork would get rejected even though it had what was asked for, or you know, it just the ridiculous requests that people had to face, and to the hurdles that they were having to jump through. One, because maybe a page was out of order, you know, because they were trying to do it themselves, or even if there was an attorney involved, pages, you know, would be out of order and the bank wouldn't accept it, or you know, whatever. It is a ridiculous process. So how can we all know that there's an access to justice issue in our country, and there's not enough attorneys and legal aid organizations to address the needs? So how can legal aid and nonprofit organizations harness the power of Upsolve for their clients? Or can they?
Well, they can, yeah, for sure. We have some legal aid partners who use our software. Well, I should start by saying our software is designed to interact with consumers, low-income Americans. It's not specifically designed for lawyers. But that said, we have a number of legal aid partners who have their either pro bono attorneys or their in-house legal aid attorneys will use the product with their clients and shorten what could be maybe a in some cases a 5-hour process, and with our software it's will usually be under an hour. So yeah, we would love to be a resource to any legal aid organization that has a high volume of folks who need Chapter 7 assistance and have simple cases. So like no real estate, no assets over $10,000 outside of a car, which is separate. No, there's a few other, if you go through our eligibility screener, there's a few other smaller eligibility criteria. But we would love to have more legal aid community partners.
I think so. In a discussion we had previously, we talked about showing partner logos or websites on organizations. So just by providing information, do you feel that that is a good way to partner with you and provide people information?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Shellie. So, one of our, the largest way that we reach people is through Google search from the content that we created that folks are coming to. And a big reason that we are reaching 2.6 million people a year with that is because there are a number of nonprofit organizations and government organizations that are linking to our site as a free resource for their constituents. And that, in addition to being valuable to their constituents who now know, oh, there's this free Chapter 7 tool, it's also really valuable for us because it actually tells Google that, oh, these nonprofit links mean that Upsolve is trustworthy and we should be prioritizing it over these multi-billion-dollar for-profit companies like Credit Karma and NerdWallet. So yeah, we have anyone who manages a legal aid site that is interested in linking to our free Chapter 7 service as a resource for their constituents, that would be, we'd love to engage with you as well.
Super. So we heard a success story earlier. Are there any other stories that have touched you and let you know that you are on the right path with Upsolve?
Yeah, can I share my screen?
Of course.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I may need to, let me make sure that you have access. There you go. You should be able to.
Okay, so the best, like one of the downsides to working in online legal aid is
Nope, you're muted.
can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So sort of my favorite part about this is the reviews that we get on Google and Facebook that you can see here. People from all around the country talking about their experience with the product, and you can see this is updated in real time. So the last 2 or 7 days ago, and this is sort of seeing these reviews and seeing the impact that our product has had on people is really one of the things that keeps me going.
That's awesome. So let's see. What are your goals and vision for the future of Upsolve?
So as I mentioned earlier, I think there's so many legal services that if people had access to, they wouldn't have to file for bankruptcy years later. They could stop their financial distress earlier in its tracks and rebuild their lives. And so debt collection lawsuits is the first one of these. Ideally, we would like to become, or we intend to become, a single stop online for all kinds of consumer debt legal issues, building products where possible and content where not possible. And so debt collection lawsuits is a huge issue. There's 4 to 7 million of them filed a year. Again, around 90% of them are ending in default judgments because people can't afford to pay lawyers. And then when those default judgments happens, people's wages are being garnished, their bank accounts are being drained, and that, let's say that $1,000 debt now has fees, penalties tacked on, and is $3,000 to $4,000. So we think solving this problem would be a great way to reach people before they need our Chapter 7 product.
It is crazy that someone who is in financial difficulties has to find money to get out of the financial difficulties. It just makes no sense if you just think about the logistics. It's just crazy to me. It's a never-ending battle.
Yeah.
So what is one question that you wish would be asked in interviews that isn't?
That's an interesting question. Well, I think one thing that we do that is like very unusual in the legal aid community is that we have a earned revenue stream. So when in the early days of Upsolve, we were part of this Silicon Valley tech company accelerator called Y Combinator, and they typically fund for-profit tech companies like Airbnb and Stripe. But every year they would admit like maybe 2 or 3 nonprofits and basically coach them to be like as close to being a nonprofit as one of these for-profit unicorns as possible. And so our mentor, this guy named Michael Seibel, was really adamant that we needed to earn revenue outside of philanthropy so that we could become sustainable. Because he said, otherwise, you'll never be able to scale your impact. For each extra person you help, you're going to be digging yourself a bigger and bigger financial hole, and you just won't be able to scale impact. And so he told us, like, figure out a way to make $500 in the next 2 weeks, or don't come back. And so we knew we couldn't like charge our users. Like, A, our users don't have money, but B, there's regulatory barriers in bankruptcy for doing that. So we had to figure something else out, and we tried a bunch of things that didn't work in those 2 weeks. But the thing that we figured out that did work is we realized that a lot of the people that were coming to our website, the 2.6 million people, they didn't want a free tool. They came from our content, but they actually wanted to hire a lawyer or at least talk to a lawyer. And we realized that lawyers would actually offer free consultations, bankruptcy lawyers, to folks with bankruptcy questions, because some percentage of them they would retain as clients. And then we also learned that they would actually pay us $20 per referral to talk to these folks. And so that became a really unexpected source of sustainability for us. Like, we now connect 23,000 consumers a year with bankruptcy lawyers for free consultations, and that's a big portion of keeping our bankruptcy service sustainable without philanthropy.
That's really awesome to have had that piece put into place, because so many organizations and tech companies who are in the access to justice space depend on funding through LSC. So to be self-sustaining or to have that piece is really fascinating. And I think a lot of people could use that and benefit from that key component. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really a really important piece. So people who know me know that social media has been very key in my career path. So I always like to hear if other people have had similar experiences. So in your career, has there been a social media channel that has been key for you?
So it's funny, as much as I love technology, I absolutely hate social media. And very early in the days of Upsolve, I went on LinkedIn a lot and was posting all the time. And I'm not sure I ever got like any, certainly didn't find any users, some people to help with our service through that. And pretty sure I didn't find any funding. Not clear there's any business value at all. But what I can say was like, it really distracted me from like solving harder problems. And so since then, I've basically been cold turkey off of social media, and life has been beautiful.
Well, that's fair. And we all know the struggles of like Twitter and whether or not people want to be on Twitter or not. So certainly I respect that. Everybody has their own. And I certainly do realize that time spent on social media could be better spent in other ways. So that's certainly a fair way of doing things. All right. So is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we move on to our last question?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I like to have in our conversations, because we're speaking with a variety of people in different backgrounds, I always like to hear what their favorite app that they're using right now, or a great tech tip for the listeners.
Oh, that's cool. So my favorite app, I have a bunch. I'm gonna say one that people probably have never heard of, but for me, it's been the most valuable thing in terms of managing a team, and that is it's an app called Fellow, Fellow, and it is a meeting agenda app. So as soon as I open a, basically it saves. It has like template agendas for all of the different types of meetings that I have. And it, if we have, we have a call today, Shellie, it will put the agenda for this in the same stream as our last call. So I can see sort of what, remind myself what happened. And then the really cool thing is as soon as I open up a Google Meet or Zoom, it will just pop up in the sidebar so I can see the agenda going as I'm in the video call. So I'm definitely a huge power user and lover of Fellow.
Well, super. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been really great learning more about Upsolve and a little bit about you as well. So thank you for sharing. And I hope that we get a lot of legal aid organizations that are willing to, link to Upsolve on their websites. I mean, it's a no cost option that helps everyone because, it gets people information. And sometimes that's all people need and want. So appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, audience, for joining us. Be sure to check our events page on lsntap.org to see what the events coming up. We have a webinar later this month on choosing software for your organization. So thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Shellie. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jonathan.